Chapter 107. The Carpenter. Seat thyself sultanically among the moons of Saturn, and take high abstracted man alone. And he seems a wonder, a grandeur, and a woe. But from the same point, take mankind in mass, and for the most part, they seem a mob of unnecessary duplicates, both contemporary and hereditary. But most humble though he was, and far from furnishing an example of the high, humane abstraction, the Pequod's carpenter was no duplicate. Hence, he now comes in person on this stage. Like all seagoing ship carpenters, and more especially those belonging to whaling vessels, he was, to a certain off-handed, practical extent, alike experienced in numerous trades and callings collateral to his own. The carpenter's pursuit being the ancient and outbranching trunk of all those numerous handicrafts which more or less have to do with wood as an auxiliary material. But besides the application to him of the generic remark above, this carpenter of the Pequod was singularly efficient in those 1,000 nameless mechanical emergencies continually recurring in a large ship upon a 3 or 4 years' voyage in uncivilized and far distant seas, for not to speak of his readiness in ordinary duties, repairing stove boats, sprung spars, reforming the shape of clumsy bladed oars, inserting bull's eyes in the deck, or new tree nails in the side planks, and other miscellaneous matters more directly pertaining to his special business. He was moreover unhesitatingly expert in all manner of conflicting aptitudes, both useful and capricious. The one grand stage where he enacted all his various parts so manifold was his vice bench, a long, rude, ponderous table furnished with several vices of different sizes, and both of iron and of wood, at all times except when whales were alongside. This bench was securely lashed athwartships against the rear of the tryworks. A belaying pin is found too large to be easily inserted into its hole. The carpenter claps it into one of his ever-ready vices, and straightway files it smaller. A lost land bird of strange plumage strays on board, and is made a captive. Out of clean-shaved rods of right whale bone and cross-beams of sperm whale ivory, the carpenter makes a pagoda-looking cage for it. An oarsman sprains his wrist. The carpenter concocts a soothing lotion. Stubb longed for vermilion stars to be painted upon the blade of his every oar. Screwing each oar in his big vise of wood, the carpenter symmetrically supplies the constellation. A sailor takes a fancy to wear shark-bone earrings. The carpenter drills his ears. Another has the toothache. The carpenter out-pincers, and clapping one hand upon his bench bids him be seated there. But the poor fellow unmanageably winces under the unconcluded operation. Whirling round the handle of his wooden vise, the carpenter signs him to clap his jaw in that, if he would have him draw the tooth. Thus, this carpenter was prepared at all points, and alike indifferent and without respect in all. Teeth he accounted bits of ivory, heads he deemed but top blocks, men themselves, he lightly held for capstans. But while now upon so wide a field, thus variously accomplished, and with such liveliness of expertness in him, too, all this would seem to argue some uncommon vivacity of intelligence, but not precisely so, for nothing was this man more remarkable than for a certain impersonal stolidity, as it were, impersonal, I say, for it so shaded off into the surrounding infinite of things that it seemed one with the general stolidity discernible in the whole visible world, which while pauselessly active in uncounted modes, still eternally holds its peace and ignores you, though you dig foundations for cathedrals. Yet was this half horrible stolidity in him, involving, too, as it appeared, an all-ramifying heartlessness. Yet was it oddly dashed at times, with an old, crutch-like, antediluvian wheezing humorousness, not unstreaked now, and then with a certain grizzled witness, such as might have served to pass the time during the midnight watch on the bearded forecastle of Noah's Ark. Was it that this old carpenter had been a lifelong wanderer, whose much rolling to and fro not only had gathered no moss, but what is more, had rubbed off whatever small outward clingings might have originally pertained to him? He was a stripped abstract, an unfractioned integral, uncompromised as a newborn babe, living without premeditated reference to this world or the next. You might almost say that this strange uncompromisedness in him involved a sort of unintelligence, for in his numerous trades he did not seem to work so much by reason or by instinct, or simply because he had been tutored to it, or by any intermixture of all these, even or uneven, but merely by a kind of deaf and dumb, spontaneous, literal process. He was a pure manipulator. His brain, if he had ever had one, must have early oozed along into the muscles of his fingers. He was like one of those unreasoning, but still highly useful, multum in parvo Sheffield contrivances, assuming the exterior, though a little swelled, of a common pocket knife, but containing not only blades of various sizes, but also screwdrivers, corkscrews, tweezers, awls, pens, rulers, nail filers, countersinkers. So if his superiors wanted to use the carpenter for a screwdriver, all they had to do was to open that part of him, and the screw was fast. Or if for tweezers, take him up by the legs, and there they were. Yet, as previously hinted, this omnitooled, open and shut carpenter was, after all, no mere machine of an automaton. If he did not have a common soul in him, he had a subtle something that somehow, anomalously, did its duty. What that was, whether essence of quicksilver or a few drops of hartshorn, there is no telling. But there it was, and there it had abided for now some 60 years or more. And this it was, this same unaccountable, cunning life principle in him, this it was that kept him a great part of the time soliloquizing, but only like an unreasoning wheel, which also hummingly soliloquizes. Or rather, his body was a sentry box, and this soliloquizer on guard there, and talking all the time to to keep himself awake. Chapter 108. Ahab and the Carpenter. The deck, first night watch. Carpenter standing before his vice bench, and by the light of 2 lanterns, busily filing the ivory joist for the leg, which joist is firmly fixed in the vise. Slabs of ivory, leather straps, pads, screws, and various tools of all sorts lying about the bench. Forward, the red flame of the forge is seen, where the blacksmith is at work. Drat the file, and drat the bone. That is hard which should be soft, and that is soft which should be hard. So we go, who file old jaws and shin bones. Let's try another. I now, this works better, sneezes. Halloa, this bone dust is sneezes. Why, it sneezes. Yes, it sneezes. Bless my soul, it won't let me speak. This is what an old fellow gets now for working in dead lumber. Saw a live tree, and you don't get this dust. Amputate a live bone, and you don't get it, sneezes. Come, come, you old smut, there, bear a hand, and let's have that ferrule and buckle screw. I'll be ready for them presently. Lucky now, sneezes. There's no knee joint to make. That might puzzle a little. But a mere shin bone, why, it's easy as making hop poles. Only I should like to put a good finish on. Time. If I but only had the time, I could turn him out as neat a leg now as ever sneezes scraped to a lady in a parlor. Those buckskin legs and calves of legs I've seen in shop windows wouldn't compare at all. They soak water, they do, and of course get rheumatic, and have to be doctored, sneezes, with washes and lotions, just like live legs. There, before I saw it off now, I must call his old mogulship and see whether the length will be all right. Too short, if anything, I guess. Oh, that's the heel, we are in luck. Here he comes. Or it's somebody else, that's certain. Ahab advancing. During the ensuing scene, the carpenter continues sneezing at times. Well, manmaker, just in time, sir. If the captain pleases, I will now mark the length. Let me measure, sir. Measured for a leg. Good. Well, it's not the first time. About it. There, keep thy finger on it. This is a cogent vice thou hast here. Carpenter, let me feel its grip once. So, it does pinch some. Oh, sir, it will break bones, beware. No fear, I like a good grip. I like to feel something in this slippery world that can hold man. What's Prometheus about there? The blacksmith, I mean, what's he about? He must be forging the buckle screw, sir, now. Right, it's a partnership. He supplies the muscle part. He makes a fierce red flame there. Aye, sir, he must have the white heat for this kind of fine work. Amen, so he must. I do deem it now a most meaning thing, that old Greek Prometheus, who made men, they say, should have been a blacksmith, and animated them with fire. For what's made in fire must properly belong to fire. And so hell's probable. How the soot flies. This must be the remainder the Greek made the Africans of. Carpenter, when he's through with that buckle, tell him to forge a pair of steel shoulder blades. There's a peddler aboard with a crushing pack. Sir, hold while Prometheus is about it. I'll order a complete man after a desirable pattern. Imprimis, 50 feet high in his socks then, chest modeled after the Thames Tunnel. Then, legs with roots to 'em, to stay in one place. Then, arms 3 feet through the wrist, no heart at all, brass forehead, and about 1/4 of an acre of fine brains. And let me see, shall I order eyes to see outwards? No, but put a skylight on top of his head to illuminate inwards. There, take the order, and away. Now, what's he speaking about? And who's he speaking to? I should like to know. Shall I keep standing here? Aside, tease but indifferent architecture to make a blind dome. Here's one. No, no, no. I must have a lantern. Ho's ho. That's it, hey. Here are 2, sir. One will serve my turn. What art thou thrusting that thief-catcher into my face for man? Thrusted light is worse than presented pistols. I thought, sir, that you spoke to Carpenter. Carpenter? Why, but no, a very tidy, and I may say, an extremely gentlemanlike sort of business thou art in here, Carpenter. Or wouldst thou rather work in clay? Sir, clay. Clay, sir. That's mud. We leave clay to ditchers, sir. The fellow's impious. What art thou sneezing about? Bone is rather dusty, sir. Take the hint, then, and when thou art dead, never bury thyself under living people's noses. Sir, oh, I guess so, yes, oh dear. Look ye, Carpenter, I dare say thou callest thyself a right good workmanlike workman. Eh? Well then, will it speak thoroughly well for thy work, if, when I come to mount this leg thou makest, I shall nevertheless feel another leg in the same identical place with it. That is, Carpenter, my old lost leg, the flesh and blood one, I mean. Canst thou not drive that old Adam away? Truly, sir, I begin to understand somewhat now. Yes, I have heard something curious on that score, sir. How that a dismasted man never entirely loses the feeling of his old spar, but it will be still pricking him at times. May I humbly ask if it be really so, sir? It is, man. Look, put thy live leg here in the place where mine once was so. Now, here is only one distinct leg to the eye, yet 2 to the soul, where thou feelest tingling life. There, exactly there to a hair, do I ist a riddle. I should humbly call it a poser, sir. Hist, then, how dost thou know that some entire, living, thinking thing may not be invisibly and uninterpenetratingly standing precisely where thou now standest? Aye, and standing there in thy spite, in thy most solitary hours, then, dost thou not fear eavesdroppers? Hold, don't speak. And if I still feel the smart of my crushed leg, though it be now so long dissolved, then why mayst not thou, Carpenter, feel the fiery pains of hell forever, and without a body? Good Lord! Truly, sir, if it comes to that, I must calculate over again. I think I didn't carry a small figure, sir. Look ye, pudding heads should never grant premises. How long before the leg is done? Perhaps an hour, sir. Bungle away at it then. and bring it to me turns to go. O life, here I am, proud as Greek god, and yet standing debtor to this blockhead for a bone to stand on. Cursed be that mortal interindebtedness, which will not do away with ledgers. I would be free as air, and I'm down in the whole world's books. I am so rich, I could have given bid for bid with the wealthiest praetorians at the auction of the Roman Empire, which was the world's. And yet I owe for the flesh in the tongue I brag with. By heavens, I'll get a crucible and into it, and dissolve myself down to one small, compendious vertebra. So, carpenter resuming his work. Well, Stubb knows him best of all, and Stubb always says he's queer, says nothing. But that one sufficient little word queer. He's queer, says Stubb. He's queer, and keeps dinning it into Mr. Starbuck all the time. Queer, sir, queer, very queer. And here's his leg. Yes, now that I think of it, here's his bedfellow. Has a stick of whale's jawbone for a wife. And this is his leg. He'll stand on this. What was that now about one leg standing in 3 places, and all 3 places standing in one hell? How was that? Oh, I don't wonder he looked so scornful at me. I'm a sort of strange thought at sometimes, they say, but that's only haphazard like. Then a short, little old body like me should never undertake to wade out into deep waters with tall, heron-built captains. The water chucks you under the chin pretty quick, and there's a great cry for lifeboats. And here's the heron's leg, long and slim, sure enough. Now, for most folks, one pair of legs lasts a lifetime, and that must be because they use them mercifully, as a tender-hearted old lady uses her roly-poly old coach horses. But Ahab, oh, he's a hard driver. Look, driven one leg to death, and spavined the other for life, and now wears out bone legs by the cord. Halloa there, you smut. Bear a hand there with those screws, and let's finish it before the resurrection fellow comes a-calling with his horn for all legs, true or false, as brewerymen go round collecting old beer barrels to fill 'em up again. What a leg this is. It looks like a real live leg, filed down to nothing but the core. He'll be standing on this tomorrow. He'll be taking altitudes on it. Halloa, I almost forgot the little oval slate, smoothed ivory, where he figures up the latitude. So chisel, file, and sandpaper now. Chapter 109. Ahab and Starbuck in the cabin. According to usage, they were pumping the ship next morning, and lo, no inconsiderable oil came up with the water. The casks below must have sprung a bad leak. Much concern was shown, and Starbuck went down into the cabin to report this unfavorable affair. In sperm whalemen with any considerable quantity of oil on board, it is a regular semi-weekly duty to conduct a hose into the hold and drench the casks with seawater, which afterwards, at varying intervals, is removed by the ship's pumps. Hereby the casks are sought to be kept damply tight while, by the changed character of the withdrawn water, The mariners readily detect any serious leakage in the precious cargo. Now, from the south and west, the Pequod was drawing nigh to Formosa and the Bashy Isles, between which lies one of the tropical outlets from the China waters into the Pacific. And so Starbuck found Ahab with a general chart of the Oriental archipelagos spread before him, and another separate one representing the long eastern coasts of the Japanese islands, Niphon, Matsumai, and Sikok, with his snow-white new ivory leg braced against the screwed leg of his table, and with a long pruning hook of a jackknife in his hand. The wondrous old man, with his back to the gangway door, was wrinkling his brow and tracing his old courses again. Who's there? Hearing the footstep at the door, but not turning round to it. On deck. Begone. Captain Ahab mistakes. It is I, the oil in the hold is leaking, sir. We must up Burton's and break out. Up Burton's and break out. Now that we are nearing Japan. Heave to here for a week to tinker a parcel of old hoops. Either do that, sir, or waste in one day more oil than we may make good in a year. What we come 20,000 miles to get is worth saving, sir. So it is, if we get it. I was speaking of the oil in the hold, sir, and I was not speaking or thinking of that at all. Begone. Let it leak. I'm all a leak myself. Aye, leaks and leaks, not only full of leaky casks, but those leaky casks are in a leaky ship. And that's a far worse plight than the Pequod's, man. Yet I don't stop to plug my leak, for who can find it in the deep-loaded hull? Or how hope to plug it, even if found, in this life's howling gale? Starbuck, I'll not have the Burtons hoisted. What will the owner say, sir? Let the owners stand on Nantucket Beach and out-yell the typhoons. What cares Ahab? Owners, owners. Thou art always prating to me, Starbuck, about those miserly owners, as if the owners were my conscience. But look ye, the only real owner of anything is its commander. And hark ye, my conscience is in this ship's keel. On deck. Captain Ahab, said the reddening mate, moving further into the cabin, with a daring so strangely respectful and cautious that it almost seemed not only every way seeking to avoid the slightest outward manifestation of itself, but within also seemed more than half distrustful of itself. A better man than I might well pass over in the what he would quickly enough resent in a younger man. Aye, and in a happier Captain Ahab. Devils, dost thou then so much as dare to critically think of me? On deck. Nay, sir, not yet, I do entreat. And I do dare, sir, to be forbearing. Shall we not understand each other better than hitherto, Captain Ahab? Ahab seized a loaded musket from the rack, forming part of most South Sea men's cabin furniture, and pointing it towards Starbuck, exclaimed, There is one God that is Lord over the earth, and one captain that is Lord over the Pequod. On deck, for an instant in the flashing eyes of the mate and his fiery cheeks, you would have almost thought that he had really received the blaze of the leveled tube. But mastering his emotion, He half calmly rose, and as he quitted the cabin, paused for an instant and said, "Thou hast outraged, not insulted me, sir. But for that I ask thee not to beware of Starbuck. Thou wouldst but laugh. But let Ahab beware of Ahab. Beware of thyself, old man. He waxes brave, but nevertheless obeys. Most careful bravery that," murmured Ahab as Starbuck disappeared. "What's that he said? Ahab, beware of Ahab. There's something there." Then, unconsciously using the musket for a staff, with an iron brow he paced to and fro in the little cabin. But presently the thick plates of his forehead relaxed, and returning the gun to the rack, he went to the deck. "Thou art but too good a fellow, Starbuck," he said lowly to the mate, then, raising his voice to the crew, "Furl the t'gallant sails, and close reef the topsails, fore and aft, back the main yard, up Burton, and break out in the main hold." It were perhaps vain to surmise exactly why it was that, as respecting Starbuck, Ahab thus acted. It may have been a flash of honesty in him, or mere prudential policy, which, under the circumstance, imperiously forbade the slightest symptom of open disaffection, however transient, in the important chief officer of his ship. However it was, his orders were executed, and the Burtons were hoisted. Chapter 110. Queequeg in his coffin. Upon searching, it was found that the casks last struck into the hold were perfectly sound, and that the leak must be further off. So, it being calm weather, they broke out deeper and deeper, disturbing the slumbers of the huge ground tier butts, and from that black midnight sending those gigantic moles into the daylight above. So deep did they go, and so ancient and corroded and weedy the aspect of the lowermost puncheons, that you almost looked next for some mouldy cornerstone cask containing coins of Captain Noah, with copies of the posted placards, vainly warning the infatuated old world from the flood. Tierce after tierce, too, of water and bread and beef and shooks of staves and iron bundles of hoops were hoisted out, till at last the piled decks were hard to get about, and the hollow hull echoed underfoot as if you were treading over empty catacombs, and reeled and rolled in the sea like an air-freighted demijohn. Top-heavy was the ship as a dinnerless student, with all Aristotle in his head. Well was it that the typhoons did not visit them then. Now, at this time it was that my poor pagan companion and fast bosom friend Queequeg was seized with a fever, which brought him nigh to his endless end. Be it said that in this vocation of whaling, sinecures are unknown dignity, and danger go hand in hand. Till you get to be captain, the higher you rise, the harder you toil. So with poor Queequeg, who, as harpooner, must not only face all the rage of the living whale, but, as we have elsewhere seen, mount his dead back in a rolling sea, and finally descend into the gloom of the hold, and bitterly sweating all day in that subterraneous confinement, resolutely manhandle the clumsiest casks and see to their stowage. To be short, among whalemen, The harpooneers are the holders, so called. Poor Queequeg, when the ship was about half disemboweled, you should have stooped over the hatchway and peered down upon him there, where, stripped to his woolen drawers, the tattooed savage was crawling about amid that dampness and slime, like a green-spotted lizard at the bottom of a well. And a well or an ice house, it somehow proved to him, poor pagan, where, strange to say, for all the heat of his sweatings, he caught a terrible chill which lapsed into a fever. And at last, after some days' suffering, laid him in his hammock, close to the very sill of the door of death. How he wasted and wasted away in those few long lingering days, till there seemed but little left of him but his frame and tattooing. But as all else in him thinned, and his cheekbones grew sharper, his eyes, nevertheless, seemed growing fuller and fuller. They became of a strange softness of luster, and mildly but deeply looked out at you there from his sickness, a wondrous testimony to that immortal health in him which could not die or be weakened, and like circles on the water, which, as they grow fainter, expand. So his eyes seemed rounding and rounding, like the rings of eternity. An awe that cannot be named would steal over you as you sat by the side of this waning savage, and saw as strange things in his face as any beheld who were bystanders when Zoroaster died. For whatever is truly wondrous and fearful in man never yet was put into words or books, and the drawing near of death, which alike levels all, alike impresses all with a last revelation, which only an author from the dead could adequately tell, so that, let us say it again, no dying Chaldee or Greek had higher and holier thoughts than those, whose mysterious shades you saw creeping over the face of poor Queequeg, as he quietly lay in his swaying hammock, and the rolling sea seemed gently rocking him to his final rest, and the ocean's invisible flood tide lifted him higher and higher towards his destined heaven. Not a man of the crew but gave him up, and as for Queequeg himself, what he thought of his case was forcibly shown by a curious favor he asked. He called one to him in the gray morning watch, when the day was just breaking, and taking his hand, said that while in Nantucket he had chanced to see certain little canoes of dark wood, like the rich war wood of his native isle. And upon inquiry, he had learned that all whalemen who died in Nantucket were laid in those same dark canoes, and that the fancy of being so laid had much pleased him, for it was not unlike the custom of his own race, who, after embalming a dead warrior, stretched him out in his canoe, and so left him to be floated away to the starry archipelagos. For not only do they believe that the stars are isles, but that far beyond all visible horizons, their own mild, uncontinented seas interflow with the blue heavens, and so form the white breakers of the Milky Way. He added that he shuddered at the thought of being buried in his hammock, according to the usual sea custom, tossed like something vile to the death-devouring sharks. No, he desired a canoe like those of Nantucket, all the more congenial to him, being a whaleman, that like a whaleboat, these coffin canoes were without a keel, though that involved but uncertain steering and much leeway adown the dim ages. Now, when this strange circumstance was made known aft, the carpenter was at once commanded to do Queequeg's bidding, whatever it might include. There was some heathenish, coffin-colored old lumber aboard, which, upon a long previous voyage, had been cut from the aboriginal groves of the Lackaday Islands. And from these dark planks, the coffin was recommended to be made. No sooner was the carpenter apprised of the order than, taking his rule, he forthwith, with all the indifferent promptitude of his character, proceeded into the forecastle and took Queequeg's measure with great accuracy, regularly chalking Queequeg's person as he shifted the rule. "The poor fellow, he'll have to die now," ejaculated the Long Island sailor, going to his vice bench. The carpenter, for convenience sake and general reference, now transferringly measured on it the exact length the coffin was to be, and then made the transfer permanent by cutting 2 notches at its extremities. This done, he marshaled the planks and his tools, and to work. When the last nail was driven, and the lid duly planed and fitted, he lightly shouldered the coffin and went forward with it, inquiring whether they were ready for it yet in that direction. Overhearing the indignant but half-humorous cries with which the people on deck began to drive the coffin away, Queequeg, to everyone's consternation, commanded that the thing should be instantly brought to him. Nor was there any denying him, seeing that, of all mortals, some dying men are the most tyrannical. And certainly, since they will shortly trouble us so little for evermore, the poor fellows ought to be indulged. Leaning over in his hammock, Queequeg long regarded the coffin with an attentive eye. He then called for his harpoon, had the wooden stock drawn from it, and then had the iron part placed in the coffin along with one of the paddles of his boat, all by his own request. Also, biscuits were then ranged round the sides within. A flask of fresh water was placed at the head, and a small bag of woody earth scraped up in the hold at the foot, and a piece of sailcloth being rolled up for a pillow, Queequeg now entreated to be lifted into his final bed, that he might make trial of its comforts, if any it had. He lay without moving a few minutes, then told one to go to his bag and bring out his little god, Yo. Then, crossing his arms on his breast with Yojo between, he called for the coffin lid, Hatch he called it, to be placed over him, the head part turned over with a leather hinge, and there lay Queequeg in his coffin, with little but his composed countenance in view. "Rarmy, it will do, it is easy," he murmured at last, and signed to be replaced in his hammock. But ere this was done, Pip, who had been slyly hovering near by all this while, drew nigh to him where he lay, and with soft sobbings took him by the hand in the other, holding his tambourine. Poor rover, will he never have done with all this weary roving? Where go ye now, but if the currents carry ye to those sweet Antilles, where the beaches are only beat with water lilies, Will he do one little errand for me? Seek out one Pip who's now been missing long. I think he's in those far Antilles. If ye find him, then comfort him, for he must be very sad for look. He's left his tambourine behind. I found it. Reg-a-dig, dig, dig. Now, Queequeg, die, and I'll beat ye your dying march. I have heard, murmured Starbuck, gazing down the scuttle, that in violent fevers men, all ignorance, have talked in ancient tongues, and that when the mystery is probed, it turns out always that in their wholly forgotten childhood those ancient tongues had been really spoken in their hearing by some lofty scholars. So to my fond faith, poor Pip, in this strange sweetness of his lunacy, brings heavenly vouchers of all our heavenly homes. Where learned he that, but there, hark, he speaks again, but more wildly now. Form 2 and 2. Let's make a general of him. Ho, where's his harpoon? Lay it across here. Rig-a-dig, dig, dig. Huzzah! Oh, for a game cock now, to sit upon his head and crow. Queequeg dies game. Mind ye that, Queequeg dies game. Take ye good heed of that, Queequeg dies game. I say game, game, game. But base little Pip, he died a coward, died all a shiver, out upon Pip. Hark ye, if ye find Pip, tell all the Antilles he's a runaway, a coward, a coward, a coward. Tell them he jumped from a whaleboat. I'd never beat my tambourine over base Pip, and hail him general if he were once more dying here. No, no. Shame upon all cowards, shame upon them. Let him go drown like Pip, that jumped from a whaleboat. Shame, shame. During all this, Queequeg lay with closed eyes, as if in a dream. Pip was led away, and the sick man was replaced in his hammock. But now that he had apparently made every preparation for death, now that his coffin was proved a good fit, Queequeg suddenly rallied. Soon there seemed no need of the carpenter's box. And thereupon, when some expressed their delighted surprise, he, in substance, said that the cause of his sudden convalescence was this. At a critical moment, he had just recalled a little duty ashore, which he was leaving undone, and therefore had changed his mind about dying. He could not die yet, he averred. They asked him then whether to live or die was a matter of his own sovereign will and pleasure. He answered, certainly. In a word, it was Queequeg's conceit that if a man made up his mind to live, mere sickness could not kill him. Nothing but a whale, or a gale, or some violent, ungovernable, unintelligent destroyer of that sort. Now, there is this noteworthy difference between savage and civilized, that while a sick, civilized man may be 6 months convalescing, generally speaking, a sick savage is almost half well again in a day. So in good time my Queequeg gained strength, and at length, after sitting on the windlass for a few indolent days, but eating with a vigorous appetite, he suddenly leaped to his feet, threw out his arms and legs, gave himself a good stretching, yawned a little bit, and then springing into the head of his hoisted boat, and poising a harpoon, pronounced himself fit for a fight. With a wild whimsiness, he now used his coffin for a sea chest, and emptying into it his canvas bag of clothes, set them in order there. Many spare hours he spent in carving the lid with all manner of grotesque figures and drawings. And it seemed that hereby he was striving, in his rude way, to copy parts of the twisted tattooing on his body. And this tattooing had been the work of a departed prophet and seer of his island, who, by those hieroglyphic marks, had written out on his body a complete theory of the heavens and the earth, and a mystical treatise on the art of attaining truth. So that Queequeg in his own proper person was a riddle to unfold, a wondrous work in one volume, but whose mysteries not even himself could read, though his own live heart beat against them. And these mysteries were therefore destined in the end to moulder away with the living parchment whereon they were inscribed, and so be unsolved to the last. And this thought it must have been which suggested to Ahab that wild exclamation of his, when one morning, turning away from surveying poor Queequeg, "Oh, devilish tantalization of the gods." Chapter 111. The Pacific. When gliding by the Bashy Isles, we emerged at last upon the great South Sea. Were it not for other things, I could have greeted my dear Pacific with uncounted thanks. For now the long supplication of my youth was answered. That serene ocean rolled eastwards from me 1,000 leagues of blue. There is, one knows not what sweet mystery about this sea, whose gently awful stirrings seem to speak of some hidden soul beneath, like those fabled undulations of the Ephesian sod over the buried evangelist St. John. And meet it is that over these sea pastures, wide-rolling watery prairies and potters' fields of all 4 continents, the waves should rise and fall, and ebb and flow unceasingly. For here, millions of mixed shades and shadows, drowned dreams, somnambulisms, reveries, all that we call lives and souls, lie dreaming still, tossing like slumberers in their beds the ever-rolling waves, but made so by their restlessness. To any meditative Magian rover, this serene Pacific, once beheld, must ever after be the sea of his adoption. It rolls the midmost waters of the world, the Indian Ocean and Atlantic being but its arms. The same waves wash the moles of the new-built Californian towns, but yesterday planted by the recentest race of men, and lave the faded but still gorgeous skirts of Asiatic lands, older than Abraham, while all between float Milky Ways of coral isles, and low-lying, endless, unknown archipelagos and impenetrable Japans. Thus this mysterious, divine Pacific zones the world's whole bulk about, makes all coasts one bay to it, seems the tide-beating heart of earth. Lifted by those eternal swells, you needs must own the seductive god, bowing your head to Pan. But few thoughts of Pan stirred Ahab's brain, as standing like an iron statue at his accustomed place beside the mizzen rigging, with one nostril he unthinkingly snuffed the sugary musk from the Bashy Isles, in whose sweet woods mild lovers must be walking, and with the other consciously inhaled the salt breath of the newfound sea. That sea in which the hated white whale must even then be swimming. Launched at length upon these almost final waters, and gliding towards the Japanese cruising ground, the old man's purpose intensified itself. His firm lips met like the lips of a vice. The delta of his forehead's veins swelled like overladen brooks. In his very sleep, his ringing cry ran through the vaulted hull. Stern all, the white whale spouts thick blood. Chapter 112. The blacksmith, availing himself of the mild, summer cool weather that now reigned in these latitudes, and in preparation for the peculiarly active pursuits shortly to be anticipated, Perth, the begrimed, blistered old blacksmith, had not removed his portable forge to the hold again, after concluding his contributory work for Ahab's leg, but still retained it on deck, fast lashed to ring bolts by the foremast, being now almost incessantly invoked by the headsmen and harpooneers and boatsmen to do some little job for them, altering or repairing, or new shaping their various weapons and boat furniture. Often he would be surrounded by an eager circle, all waiting to be served, holding boat spades, pike heads, harpoons, and lances, and jealously watching his every sooty movement as he twirled. Nevertheless, this old man was a patient hammer wielded by a patient arm. No murmur, no impatience, no petulance did come from him. Silent, slow, and solemn, bowing over still further his chronically broken back, he twirled away, as if toil were life itself, and the heavy beating of his hammer, the heavy beating of his heart. And so it was, most miserable, a peculiar walk in this old man, a certain slight, but painful appearing yawing in his gait, had at an early period of the voyage excited the curiosity of the mariners, and to the importunity of their persistent questionings, he had finally given in. And so it came to pass that everyone now knew the shameful story of his wretched fate. Belated, and not innocently, one bitter winter's midnight, on the road running between two country towns, the blacksmith half stupidly felt the deadly numbness stealing over him, and sought refuge in a leaning, dilapidated barn. The issue was the loss of the extremities of both feet. Out of this revelation, part by part, at last came out the 4 acts of the gladness, and the one long, and as yet uncatastrophed 5th act of the grief of his life's drama. He was an old man who, at the age of nearly 60, had postponedly encountered that thing in sorrow's technicals called ruin. He had been an artisan of famed excellence, and with plenty to do, owned a house and garden, embraced a youthful, daughter-like, loving wife, and 3 blithe, ruddy children. Every Sunday went to a cheerful-looking church, planted in a grove. But one night, under cover of darkness, and further concealed in a most cunning disguisement, a desperate burglar slid into his happy home and robbed them all of everything. And darker yet to tell, the blacksmith himself did ignorantly conduct this burglar into his family's heart. It was the bottle conjurer. Upon the opening of that fatal cork, forth flew the fiend, and shriveled up his home. Now, for prudent, most wise, and economic reasons, the blacksmith's shop was in the basement of his dwelling, but with a separate entrance to it, so that always had the young and loving healthy wife listened with no unhappy nervousness, but with vigorous pleasure, to the stout ringing of her young-armed old husband's hammer, whose reverberations, muffled by passing through the floors and walls, came up to her, not unsweetly, in her nursery, and so, to stout labor's iron lullaby, the blacksmith's infants were rocked to slumber. O woe on woe! O death, why canst thou not sometimes be timely? Hadst thou taken this old blacksmith to thyself, ere his full ruin came upon him, then had the young widow had a delicious grief, and her orphans a truly venerable, legendary sire to dream of in their after years, and all of them a care-killing competency. But death plucked down some virtuous elder brother, on whose whistling daily toil solely hung the responsibilities of some other family, and left the worse than useless old man standing, till the hideous rot of life should make him easier to harvest. Why tell the whole? The blows of the basement hammer every day grew more and more between, and each blow every day grew fainter than the last. The wife sat frozen at the window, with tearless eyes, glitteringly gazing into the weeping faces of her children. The bellows fell, the forge choked up with cinders. The house was sold, the mother dived down into the long churchyard grass. Her children twice followed her thither, and the houseless, familyless old man staggered off a vagabond in crape, his every woe unreverenced, his grey head a scorn to flaxen curls. Death seems the only desirable sequel for a career like this. But death is only a launching into the region of the strange, untried. It is but the first salutation to the possibilities of the immense remote, the wild, the watery, the unshored. Therefore, to the death-longing eyes of such men, who still have left in them some interior compunctions against suicide, does the all-contributed and all-receptive ocean alluringly spread forth his whole plain of unimaginable, taking terrors and wonderful new life adventures. And from the hearts of infinite Pacifics, the 1,000 mermaids sing to them, "Come hither, broken-hearted. Here is another life without the guilt of intermediate death. Here are wonders supernatural without dying for them. Come hither, bury thyself in a life which, to your now equally abhorred and abhorring landed world, is more oblivious than death. Come hither, put up thy gravestone too within the churchyard, and come hither till we marry thee." Hearkening to these voices, east and west, by early sunrise, and by fall of eve, the blacksmith's soul responded, I come. And so Perth went a-wailing,